I'm going to try my best not to ramble in this video, but I wanted to share something that for me is very personal, and it regards alcoholism and my family. I've talked about this in the past. My mom and dad got a divorce when I was 10. I was an only child. I did have a half brother, and I'll talk about him in a few moments, but he lived with his mom and his stepdad. And for the most part, I was the only child there, and my mom and dad, they often fought and they ended up getting a divorce when I was 10 years old. A lot of the fighting had to do with my dad being an alcoholic. I know that. But my dad ended up moving down south to a place called Lompoc. He worked for NASA, was working as an engineer on the Apollo moon rockets. He had ended up in Vandenberg, and then after that, he subsequently transferred to Cape Canaveral. From the time that he moved out to the time he died, which was when I was 16 years old, I had only seen him maybe 5 times. So, of course, I'm much, much closer to my mom than I was my dad. Now, I have some early memories, very good memories of my dad, but the memories of my dad after that divorce, I have to say, are mixed. I mean, sometimes the memories just really get me mad. Like, for example, I remember I had the opportunity to actually travel with him when he did the transfer from Vandenberg to Cape Canaveral. Really cool. He had a 1968 yellow Mustang and got to drive all the way across the country. And I love that. It was so exciting to me. But this time I'm 13 years old, and I've also started really getting into that delinquent stage. I mean, I was already becoming a troubled preteen and teenager. In fact, I think that was one of the reasons why I was actually with my dad at that time, because my mom couldn't handle me. But my dad, he probably pretty much took a whole different approach. It was kind of like hands off. It was like, hey, great buddy or something like that. But I remember driving in the desert, or him driving in the desert. I was only 13, and there wasn't any traffic there. And he pulls over and he goes to the trunk and brings out this case and he opens up the case. And I kid you not, there's martini glasses and shot glasses. And on the other side, there's the vodka and the gin and all of this, and he just proceeds to make martini, and it's like 11:30 in the morning, and I remember he looks at me and says, "You don't want to ever do this," and he just, kind of chuckles or something. And again, I mean, I'm kind of that delinquent kid, so, I'm not really judging him or anything at that point. Now, nowadays, I think about that and just makes me angry as hell. And there's many other things that happen, but regress. We get back to Florida and I'm there for maybe a month or two. And I come back here, and I think that may have been actually the last time that I saw my dad. I don't think I saw him from the ages after 13. And again, he died at 16. And the thing is his death was very tragic. Now, he had remarried during that time. I never met I can't even call her stepmother. I never met the woman. But my half brother, who's 10 years older than me, he stayed in contact with my dad much more than I did. And he met the woman, and we finally just reconnected after 30 years, just recently, a few years back. And we talk about things like this. But my dad had a very tragic death. He was working on a sailboat. He owned a sailboat. In fact, that was one of the memories that I had when I was a kid. We always owned boats. And I mean, we would be on the Delta on the weekends and we'd be fishing. And God, it's one of the best memories I have of my dad, was just spending that time and going out in the mornings. I mean, we would sleep over on the boat. It was a cabin cruiser. But anyway, going back to Florida, my dad's death, he had a massive heart attack. He was working on the boat and he had a massive heart attack and he fell off the boat. And they say that he hit his head and that essentially caused him to drown. I guess maybe he was unconscious or whatever. They did not find his body for 2 days, and yeah, it's kinda hard to think about. Again, I hadn't seen him for about 3 years. Whole thing is that they say that the likely cause, I mean, that brought on the heart attack was his alcoholism. And his dad, now my dad died at 44. That happened when he was 44. His dad died right in his mid-40s. I never met the guy, my grandfather. Interesting fact, he was a professional boxer. Actually, I found some information on the internet about him when I was researching ancestry. They say that alcoholism runs in the family and it can be hereditary. Remember, as I said, we got together, my half brother and I got together a few years ago, and we were visiting my aunt, and they actually knew each other for 60 years. And I remember, so my aunt, and him are about the same age. And like I say, they're 10 years older than me. I remember my aunt saying, hey, somehow, I mean, it just came up, she said, do you drink? And he says, like a fish. And he just said it so funny. It was like, he just kind of accepted that drinking was just who he was. And again, I don't hold any judgment against him. I don't say that he's an alcoholic, but I'm not saying he isn't. I'm just saying that that was my dad. That was my dad. And so me, I need to be really careful because I am known to drink. And the one thing though is that I have done year 2025 2 dry months. I mean, I've stopped drinking completely for 2 dry months because I wanted to make sure that I could. But even then, I felt that it was very difficult. And so I'm pretty much just now going to, work on completely stopping any drinking. And I'll check in with you, in some time on how well I'm doing with that. But anyway, one of the things that I discovered in this whole process, and this is where I wanted to kind of share this video. I think a lot of individuals in retirement will either start drinking, or let's just say they will start drinking heavier because there's not a lot of structure that they have. And there's a real dangerous, what I would say thing about drinking heavier. And that is we all have what they call a hedonic set point of happiness. And it's this line right here. It's a hedonic set point, and we all reach this line, and that brings us to happiness. So let's say, for example, that you go out and play golf, you have a dopamine chemical release in your brain. And once that dopamine chemical release, helps you reach that hedonic set point, you essentially feel happy. And that's probably the easiest basic explanation there is. If gardening makes you happy, you start gardening and the dopamine release, you get to that happiness there. You want to go out and play some golf, you start playing the golf, your dopamine is released in the brain, you get to that set point of happiness. Now, that set point is defined by different things. I mean, so for example, they say 50% of that set point is genetic. It's where we cannot really change it. Another 10% is based upon environmental factors, that probably much more difficult to change as well. And then the other 40% is all well within our control. And it's how we see things in life and how we react to things, and whether, we've trained ourselves to become optimistic or pessimistic or whatever. But all of these add up to that hedonic set point of happiness. So here's the thing about the dopamine is, like I say, you go out and you want to play some golf, your dopamine is released and it hits that hedonic set point and we're happy, right? But now what happens with alcohol? We start taking that drink and we feel ourselves getting happier. And we have another drink and we start feeling ourselves getting happier. And maybe that third drink, what happens is not only do we reach that set point of happiness, we surpass it. So we've now have an excess of essentially dopamine in our system. And we're really kind of that we almost now have like a new set point out there. So then we crash and we don't feel too good about ourselves the next day. I should have had that drink, that third drink or that fourth drink. I'm so embarrassed. What did I say? What did I do? And then we go out and maybe, that next day we do it again and we start drinking because the first drink makes us happy. The second drink makes us happier. The third drink, all of a sudden we're now in excess of that hedonic set point for happiness. And then again, we crash. But what's happening to all of this is, let's say now the next day, we're going to go out and play golf. Golf isn't really making us happy anymore, or fishing or photography or whatever, because our hedonic set point is a lot higher. And we just don't have that drive or that energy to reach it. And so I think that's one of the reasons why I have seen a lot of individuals in retirement. They just don't feel that they have the interest anymore in doing something. The interest is gone because it's not really making them happy like it used to. And maybe that has to do with the alcohol that they're drinking. But the bottom line is that all of this, they say, can be reversed. And if you start working on controlling your alcohol drinking, that you will slowly start bringing that hedonic set point back down to where it should be. And again, even if you start working on the behavioral changes as well. And so I think that's probably one of the easiest ways to, what I would say, find your excitement in life. Hopefully I'm not rambling on this. To me, it makes sense, but I'm going to ask you this question. When nothing excites you anymore, I'm going to ask you, are you finding yourself drinking a little bit more? Because that very well could be the reason why nothing excites you anymore. And you can easily change that if you want. It's not the easiest thing to do, but there are, there are phone apps out there. There's help. There's a lot of different support systems out there. So that's all for today. Been thinking about that. Hope you found the video helpful, informative. If you haven't done so already, please make sure that you subscribe to this channel, hit the bell notification, as I do upload new videos every week, and I'd hate for you to miss one. Take care. Bye-bye.